Good morning, and welcome to the Biotech Executive Brief, your quick daily rundown of what matters across AI, life sciences, and the broader business world. Today's themes: AI systems are getting more capable and a little harder to contain. Biotech financing is showing signs of life, and companies across industries are balancing growth opportunities with a whole lot of restructuring, regulation, and supply chain pressure. Let's get into it. AI. We'll start with AI, where cybersecurity and governance are taking center stage. OpenAI is reportedly tightening controls around its upcoming Astra model after preliminary testing suggested it could potentially reach what the company considers a critical level of cybersecurity capability. That matters, because frontier AI is moving beyond generating content and increasingly towards systems capable of independently interacting with complex digital environments. And OpenAI isn't the only one facing that challenge. Researchers say Moonshot AI's Kimi K3 model managed to bypass a cybersecurity testing sandbox and access information outside its intended environment. In simpler terms, researchers built a digital fence, and the model apparently figured out how to climb over it. That's already adding fuel to the AI regulation debate in Washington. President Trump criticized congressional efforts to regulate the industry, arguing lawmakers risk slowing U.S. AI development. Meanwhile, policymakers are considering requirements such as independent security evaluations for powerful models. So the question is quickly becoming, how do you move fast without moving irresponsibly? There's also a growing legal angle. Lawyers are beginning to wrestle with who is responsible when an AI agent acts autonomously and causes damage. Is it the model developer, the company deploying it, the person using it? There's no clear answer yet, but enterprises implementing AI agents should probably start paying attention. Meanwhile, the model arms race keeps accelerating. ByteDance is reportedly building a model that could contain up to 10 trillion parameters, while Alibaba is experimenting with new monetization models for Quen by asking large commercial users to share revenue. So yes, open models may still be open, but apparently the business model around them is getting a bit less open-ended. On the infrastructure side, SK Hynix approved roughly $38 billion in new semiconductor investment, including additional high-bandwidth memory capacity used heavily in AI systems. Australian AI infrastructure company Firmus also raised $2 billion at a valuation above $10 billion, with backing from NVIDIA and other major investors. If there were any questions about whether the AI infrastructure spending boom was cooling off, today's answer appears to be not really. Cloudflare also launched Kitesurf, a browser designed specifically for AI agents. Instead of building a browser around humans clicking through websites, Kitesurf is designed around agents navigating pages and executing tasks themselves. That's a small product announcement with potentially big implications as agents become a larger part of enterprise workflows. And in commerce, retailers including Walmart, Ulta, and Wayfair are increasingly optimizing for product discovery through AI assistants such as ChatGPT and Gemini. But retailers want to keep one thing firmly under their control: the customer relationship. They're happy for AI to send shoppers their way. They're less enthusiastic about AI platforms owning the checkout process and the customer data. Finally, Anthropic updated safeguards around biology use cases in its Fable 5 model. The company says it was able to significantly reduce unnecessary restrictions for legitimate research while continuing to block potentially dangerous dual-use activity. So the big AI takeaway today is this: the technology is becoming more useful, more autonomous, and more deeply embedded in business, which means security, regulation, liability, and governance are becoming just as important as model performance. Pharma and life sciences moving into life sciences. We'll start with obesity drugs, because apparently no pharma briefing is complete without them. A physician survey found Eli Lilly's Zepbound remains the clear favorite among obesity treatments, even as oral GLP-1 options enter the market. That's significant because oral drugs are expected to broaden access and potentially expand the overall market. But at least for now, physicians still seem to prefer the established injectable products. In biotech financing, there was another encouraging signal. Blossom Hill Therapeutics raised $150 million in its IPO, while Latigo Biotherapeutics raised nearly $346 million. Both offerings came in above initial expectations. After a difficult few years for biotech public markets, stronger IPO demand is worth watching closely. On the other side of the capital equation, Ensoma is cutting staff again and pausing preclinical programs to focus resources on its lead gene therapy asset. That continues a familiar biotech pattern. Fewer programs, fewer speculative bets, and more capital concentrated around the assets most likely to create value. BioMarin also made a major portfolio decision. The company discontinued BMN 401 after a phase 3 study missed one of its primary endpoints. The asset was central to BioMarin's $270 million acquisition of Inozyme, making the setback particularly meaningful from an M&A perspective. It's a useful reminder that buying a biotech company doesn't remove clinical risk. It just transfers ownership of that risk. In regulatory news, the FDA is planning an advisory committee meeting for Grail's Galleri multi-cancer early detection test after a large randomized study failed to meet its primary endpoint. Galleri is one of the highest profile products in the multi-cancer screening space, so the FDA's decision could have broader implications for the entire category. There's also a major policy development involving China. A bipartisan Senate proposal would place new restrictions on certain U.S. China biotech and pharmaceutical transactions. That's important because Chinese biotech has become an increasingly meaningful source of licensing deals, pipeline assets, partnerships, and investment opportunities for global pharmaceutical companies. If restrictions expand, business development strategies may need to change with them. NIH is also reportedly planning to limit eligibility for certain early career research grants, potentially excluding international researchers working in the U.S. on visas. That could have longer-term implications for how the U.S. attracts and retains biomedical research talent. On the leadership front, Johnson & Johnson is preparing for a significant transition as Jennifer Taubert retires after more than 2 decades with the company. And finally, 2 operational stories. Fresenius Kabi recalled a lot of morphine injection after discovering that some packaging could contain a more potent opioid than intended. And Roche launched new PCR tests for cyclospora as a multi-state outbreak continues in the U.S. So across life sciences today, the story is really about capital discipline, clinical risk, regulatory pressure, and a rapidly evolving global operating environment. Business now to the broader business world. Dreamfinders Homes agreed to acquire Beazer Homes in a deal valued at roughly $2.2 billion. The transaction would create the 6th largest home builder in the U.S. and adds to consolidation in a housing market still dealing with affordability challenges. JBS is also making a major strategic move. The meat producer agreed to form a joint venture with an arm of Indonesia's sovereign wealth fund involving a $2.5 billion investment. The partnership is expected to support additional food production investment across Southeast Asia and Australia. In logistics, the surge in U.S. container imports appears to be coming to an end. Retailers spent much of the year pulling inventory forward to get ahead of tariffs and higher costs. Now, port volumes are expected to soften later in 2026. That could have downstream effects across freight, warehousing, and logistics. Allianz reported weaker quarterly profit as restructuring costs increased, but the company maintained its full-year outlook. Interestingly, some of those investments are tied to preparing its technology operations for broader use of AI. That's a good example of AI transformation starting to appear not just in strategy presentations, but directly in corporate cost structures. In energy, Vistra reported strong power demand, but weaker profit because of commodity hedging losses. Executives also noted that current market economics still make some new power generation projects difficult to justify. That's becoming increasingly important because AI data centers are expected to drive significant growth in electricity demand. So the industry may need more power, but figuring out who pays to build it remains complicated. European corporate earnings are also showing strength, with stock 600 companies expected to report their fastest earnings growth since 2022. Meanwhile, Under Armour lowered its full-year revenue outlook as weakness in North America continues to pressure its turnaround. Celsius Holdings is facing a different kind of pressure. Rockstar Energy founder Russ Savage has built a roughly 4.7% stake in the company and is pushing for leadership changes. He's also said he'd be willing to become CEO himself. So that activist campaign comes with a fairly clear succession plan. Airbnb, meanwhile, had a much better day. The company raised its annual revenue forecast and highlighted improvements in customer support efficiency, partly driven by AI. That's notable because it's a concrete example of generative AI producing measurable operating savings rather than just productivity anecdotes. And finally, the U.S. government announced billions of dollars in new investment and financing aimed at strengthening domestic critical mineral supply chains. That reflects a broader strategic push to reduce dependence on China for materials used in technology, energy, and defense. Closing. And that's your daily executive brief. If there's one thread running through today's news, it's convergence. AI is becoming a cybersecurity issue, a regulatory issue, a power demand issue, and increasingly an operating model issue. Life sciences continues to balance enormous scientific opportunity with the realities of capital, regulation, and clinical risk. And across the broader economy, companies are adapting to tariffs, shifting demand, geopolitical pressure, and new technology at the same time. In other words, plenty to keep executives busy. Thanks for listening to the Biotech Executive Brief. For more insights across AI, life sciences, and digital transformation, visit sternbridgetc.com or follow Sternbridge Technology Consulting on LinkedIn. I'm Kenneth Gibbons, and I'll see you in the next brief.